welcome to Plus One to Gaming. I'm Chris.
And I'm Eric.
And joining us today is our good friend Billy. Hey, Billy.
How are you?
Oh, we're doing pretty awesome. Mark's going to have the day off, and we're going to talk today about combat in D&D 5e, and more specifically, how to keep combat moving, some different ways to think about combat in your game, and different ways that you can customize combat or adjust it to make it better for your game, for your table, and your players. So, Billy, you're going to be DMing the next session for us, Book of the Raven and Candlekeep Mysteries. Do you want to kind of take us off and share some of your perspectives about combat in 5e and how do you keep it moving? How do you organize your combat, and what are some tips or tricks that you've learned to kind of keep things moving at an appropriate pace for the game?
Sure. There's a set pace for combat, since it basically turns into a turn-based RPG at that point, kind of like a Final Fantasy or something like that, where everybody has a set turn and it goes in an order, and we know what that order is. So the main thing you're trying to do is keep a good flow, since you're not confused on who does what, and if I'm doing this person's doing this at the same time, like when you're doing exploration, when you have two people doing something important at the same time, how do you resolve that? Combat's a little easier, but it can very easy to be bogged down and have like one counter take 2 hours. So what I really like to do is I think it's important to know what type of combat your party or your group likes, first of all.
And what do you mean by that? Like, what does that look like?
Because like descriptions I like being very descriptive in my combat. So I don't want to just say, okay, you hit. Like, I want to, take a few seconds to show each, swing of the blade, like, if it beats your AC, but not your AC with your shield, then it bounces off your shield, things like that. But it just takes a little bit extra time, 2 or 3 seconds, maybe 5 seconds each round, or each time to go into those descriptions. So if you really have like a combat heavy, like people that just like crunchy numbers, they're not, they're looking at it as, did I hit or did I miss? Like, was I successful or was I not successful?
Right.
And luckily, I don't think any of us are like that, but some people out there, they may be. Like, if they are the combat oriented, where they roll the dice and you're like, all right, you hit. And you just keep that moving there, because it's more about like the time is taken for strategy and not for role playing.
Yeah, and there's D&D started off as a war game simulation, and so people, it's still valid, even though it's kind of evolved over the years to more of a story playing and collaborative role playing game. There's still people who really enjoy that very tactical and granular combat experience. So I think, to your point, like that's totally valid. You just have to be able to adjust the combat, adjust the encounter for both the people at the table, and make sure that things are staying moving.
Wrong way to play at all, as long as everybody's having fun. The only wrong way to play is if people aren't having fun. Then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
So I wanted to preface that first off when I start giving advice, because this is how I would do it, is that I like to have ideas in my head, like while they're rolling and doing the figuring out what to do, I'm thinking of cool phrases that you could do. Like, if they have a sword, just thinking like, oh, he's gonna slash his leg, or something like that. And it makes me have that ready, so that when he does it, you're not just like, oh, okay, you hit and it slices his leg. Like, that's not immersive. Like, so it's just slowing it down. Like, no one's excited to hear it. You're adding description.
Yeah, and to your point, being like a fan of the characters, knowing the characters and like what weapons they're using, how they're fighting, I feel like adds to that flavor, because you can, if you're playing Camby the Rainbow Cleric, you can, if you're a fan of that character, you can kind of help add those flavors when describing the combat scenes.
Yeah, and it can be really simple, just like, like Cammy, she had her mace. You're like, Cammy swings and donk, it bounces off the armor. And like, easy enough, very simple. And so I like to, like I don't like to focus on like making this huge like 5 or 6 sentence, acrobatic thing. I'm not, Ari Salvatore, and I'm not describing a Driz Jordan like encounter where you're talking about flipping and all that other cool stuff. Like if you have a character that does that, it could get very like it's cool once in a while, but if every like somebody is like that rogue, it's like I'm gonna flip over and do a backflip and all this other stuff, like it shouldn't be the normal thing. Like if they did something daring, they rolled a high, you know, a check and they succeeded on something. Oh, I'm going to jump off here and I'm going to try to flip behind him and hit him in the back. Then you get very descriptive and that. But like with your normal attack when it's just back and forth, I like to just keep it to, like a one sentence thing. Because then you also don't have one character dominating the action, and that can also bring a party down. Is where you have one character that's just way more combat oriented and just more combat successful. It's happened a lot with one of our friends who just, I don't know if he rolls poorly or just makes poor characters.
Talking about me?
You're talking about Mac, how like he's just unsuccessful in combat, just always constantly habitually unsuccessful in combat. And how do we make sure he has fun?
Yeah.
And I think I'm getting off the pacing thing here, but it also is, I think it's important too, because if your pacing is off and then they do something and then they dismiss, it's unsuccessful, and then they have to wait 45 minutes for them to have another turn,
Check out.
Yeah.
they check out. They're laying down, they're checking on their phone. And so you got to keep the other characters involved. So I think there's a lot of different ways to do it. I think my best way is kind of like pre-plan in your head while they're deciding what they're going to do, have an idea of what the other characters are going to do. So especially if you have a heavy NPC or heavy number of monsters, it's just like monster 1 does this, monster 2 does this. Like you're not thinking, so you have a strategy of what the monsters want. You're not just reacting 100% to what they do. You're like, okay, these monsters want to, they may be smart, so they know that they want to get the guy in the back who's doing damage with the arrows. And so that's what they're going to try to do unless somebody blocks them.
Yeah.
So have the monster characters have a strategy so that when something happens, you can react. Okay, they're going to do this. And it keeps it interesting, so you're not just like, all right, who hasn't been hit for a while? I'm going to have them be hit.
That's a good point. There's been many encounters on games that I maybe haven't really prepped that much for, and there's an encounter and I didn't really have a strategy or a game plan for what the bad guys are going to do, and having just a little bit of motivation or goal, or I guess like aside from just basically what you said, oh, I haven't attacked this player in a while, might as well spread the love. It gives it more immersion in realism into the encounter, and maybe just raises the stakes a little higher. Erik, it sounded like you had something to say. Did you want to jump in?
Yeah. First of all, I agree that your monsters, your antagonists, whatever they may be, need a motivation in combat, and that kind of helps drive their actions. I think along with Chris, like that took me kind of a long time to figure out, because I was doing that, like, I don't know, I didn't want to be the main DM, so I would like, he hits player 1 and now he hits player 2 for no reason other than I hit player 1 and I don't want to kill him. I think that's, if we're going to come with some takeaways, I think that's a very good, like very easy takeaway, that the monsters that you are playing in combat need a motivation, and that kind of leads to their tactics. Something I wanted to kind of jump back to that Bill mentioned a little bit, that also took me years to really figure out. And one day I just had like an epiphany. When you're describing if a player hits or not, there are several ways to describe that they do not hit. So if their attack roll is under the natural AC of the monster, they miss. If the attack roll is under the AC plus the dex, like addition to AC, then the monster dodges. If their attack is under the AC plus armor, then the armor blocks it. You hit their armor, but it does no damage. And then if the attack is under the AC plus shield, then they block it with the shield. So I normally will have, especially for like, if we're going to be in a big fight with like one person, because it's hard to do with a bunch of like little monsters, I'll have that kind of listed out. Like his natural AC is 10. So if they roll lower than a 10, he dodges, and so on and so on, all the way up to like his max AC. So that way it's not just you miss, because you don't miss. He dodges, or his armor takes the blow, or his shield takes the blow. Those kind of, it just adds a little more flavor to the combat, makes it more interesting. And doesn't, like Bill was saying, doesn't really take any more time than saying you don't hit with that roll.
What I like about that approach is you kind of outsourced the legwork to that rating system, with the basically different DCs that or outcomes based on the rolls, gives you a little quick tool that you can use and just quickly refer to, like a reference table, to give those results, instead of having to keep those numbers, in your head. You can just have them on your monster card, if you're using those.
Yeah.
And it makes it pretty easy.
It gives me a line. I don't have to think like, well, you raise your sword and, I have a line for each one of these. You swing your sword wildly and miss him. But you swing your sword, but he definitely dodges. You swing your sword and hit, but the armor is too thick. Like, it gives me something to say. So I am improvising a little bit, but I have my parameters. So it just makes it easier. Yeah, it makes it easier to not get like tripped up and like in my head of like, oh, what's happening in this fight? Which oftentimes can happen because you're performing when you're a player or a DM. We are performing for each other, if for nothing else. And you can get in your head of like some little stage fright, even when it's something as simple as you miss. You want to perform, and you want, like Billy said, that the point of the game is for everyone to have fun. So I want to perform to make you guys have fun, and I can get, kind of self-conscious about it. So this little system gives me some parameters that makes that easier.
And, kind of to add to that, especially with sort of the concept of outsourcing, one of the things that I love to do, and I can't remember where I learned this from. I'm pretty sure I didn't come up with it myself. I'm sure I read it from somewhere, or some other awesome DM taught it to me. But I love to just hand over the descriptions to the players themselves, especially on like killing blows. Yeah, you just bested this thing. How does it end? Tell us. And I try to do that as much as possible on those killing blows, because I think that's really cool. Like, it's a really cool moment to allow the players to just have a limelight shined on them for a moment. But you could also do that you could outsource even more of the attacks to the players if you wish.
Yeah, you were the first DM I've ever had do that. And actually, the first time you did it, I had no clue what you were asking me to do.
Yeah, I 100% cannot take like credit for coming up with the idea, but I can't.
Yeah,
for the life of me,
I don't remember what it was, but you're like, tell me what that looks like, because I rolled, and I knew I hit because you can figure out the AC at that point. And I was like, I don't know what you mean. What like tell you what looks like? Like, we're standing in a forest. It looks foresty and dark. But after I knew what you expected at that point, it is kind of fun, because it's like, I don't know, you kind of know you won the lottery at that point. Like, I got the killing blow. We beat this thing. I don't feel like because you're put on the spot,
Definitely.
Because you can sometimes figure it out, but I don't know if I'm going to get the killing blow. So I don't always have something like planned, and I'm like, she just kills it unceremoniously.
But I mean, in that sense, like with Levo, that character, that made sense. She wouldn't be, necessarily flashy.
Efficient. Yeah, I think it's a good idea to have it as a reward. So like if you kill a monster that's been really tough, or if you try that acrobatic move and it succeeds, then you do hand it over to the player to describe, their reward is they do what they want to do at that point. Like, what was your goal? Like, how did you want this to play out? Because that's how it's going to play out, because you succeeded. And so I think keeping those down to like a very high critical or a very risky maneuver, or that killing blow on the tough boss, definitely it's a form of a reward, because it gives the control to the player. And it does take a while for them to describe what they want to do. But if you do it, not on every single, oh, you killed a goblin, how did you kill the goblin? No, you just, the goblin died. He's fodder. But I think that's a brilliant idea, and I didn't do that until you did it, and then completely see the value in it, because you don't want to have somebody do something risky, and then you're like, okay, this is what you do, and the guy's like, I didn't really want to do that. Like, that's not what I wanted to do. I think so.
I agree. As a reward, I think that's a great way to phrase it, because it's such an easy thing to give over to the players that means so much and gives them that just agency. I feel like as a DM, I really am hesitant anytime I have to take any agency away from the players and their characters. And so, like, describing their attacks, that's a simple one, but like giving them those really cool moments, I think is just really cool.
Yeah. And I want to just circle back real quick to that, describing the attacks based on the success of the AC. And it does, like, it's very easy, and I like it also because it can also give clues, because battle is also it could be a mystery of how we don't know how high that AC is. So if you say like, oh, he barely dodges, and you rolled a 4, that's not really fun, but like, if this guy rolls a 17 and you're like, oh, it's coming down, and at the last minute he manages to get out of the way, then it was pretty close, and so if you don't have the ACs and all that stuff on there, and you're, it could also just be as simple as how high did he roll? Like if he rolled just below the AC, if the monster is heavy, then he blocked it with either his shield, or it barely glanced off his, he turned just in time to glance it off his armor. If he's high dex, then he barely dodges out of the way. Yeah. If it's like 12 or 13, it's solidly that it would hit somebody not moving but him, then you can say like, oh, it just glanced off armor, he dodges, but you don't have to say like he barely dodges out of the way. It's like, oh, you swing, but he turns his body and avoids it.
Yeah, and that is an interesting thing about like D&D, that I guess it's like in the culture, like it's maybe a little hard to explain. Like, I'm not supposed to know this monster when we're fighting. I'm not supposed to know how much health they have. I'm not supposed to know their weaknesses, because the character doesn't know. I might know, that like this whatever this is resistant to fire or whatever. I'm not supposed to know their AC. So I do kind of have fun in accounts. Like, normally I do, especially if it is a monster that I personally don't know what it is. I try to track their health. So I'm like, all right, we did 7 damage. Chris did 4 damage. Billy did 8 damage. Or, that's minus this. And I track their AC. So like, all right, a 15 misses, a 16 misses. 17 hits. Okay, so now I know his AC. Like, it is, like you said, but like it's an investigation almost. I'm learning about this creature as we go. So those descriptions are kind of, they're not necessary, but it's kind of cool. Like, I can figure out more about this monster than if we just say hit or miss.
Yeah. And, if it's a complicated monster with different immunities or resistances, I feel like a good DM is going to roll those into the description to kind of hint to the players that their methods aren't effective, and then to encourage them. Hopefully that will encourage them to adjust their tactics. If it's some kind of like turtle monster and it's immune or resistant to piercing, making sure that the ranger is getting that feedback early, it is going to, it's not, I want to talk about this later in this conversation about sort of the DM versus the players and whether or not you want to adopt that mindset during combat. I don't think, the game is not really built that way, and I don't think that that's necessarily the most fun approach, but that's my personal perspective. But giving that feedback and offering that feedback to the players and allowing them to take that information as clues and adjust is going to make for a more exciting encounter. Billy, there was a game that we played, I think you referenced it in an episode past, where we were, in a mansion fighting some kind of spectral spirit. And based on the feedback you were giving from our combat encounter, realized that she was not going to be defeated by traditional methods. And we had to figure out a different way to kind of subdue this spirit. We wouldn't have been able to figure that out if you hadn't given us the right amount of clues and feedback during the encounter to make those decisions. Otherwise, and then we probably would have just wiped. And that's not fun.
Yeah.
It's definitely, I mean, combat is another investigation, but it's a different type of investigation, and it's it's important to know is that if the monster has low health and high AC, or low AC and high health like a giant or something, he's just a meat shield, because your tactics will be different. Maybe you'll take that ability that hits harder but has a less chance to hit if he's got low AC, because you're like, okay, it's worth it, but you won't take it on the glass cannon, who it's not a lot of health, but it's very hard to hit. Maybe you'll take the thing where you do less damage. It's all, we have those abilities to react to the different situations, and the only time you're going to use them is if clues about the monsters, and that's how I see the combat abilities and combat like that. It's kind of the same thing as investigation. Is you need to figure out the best way to do it, and then reward them for figuring out a efficient way or a cool way to do it, and give them those feedback clues that they're not just doing the same thing every single time. Like, this is my move set. I built my character to do this one thing, and they're going to do this one thing. And if they did, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invent a monster or modify that monster so it doesn't work. What are you going to do now? Like, this is what I do. I'm very efficient at this. Okay, cool. You throw another obstacle in them, just because at that point they're not, they're just brute forcing their way through things, which is fun from time to time, but it gets away from.
They need to be challenged.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's actually highlights kind of a point I wanted to talk about is why is this encounter happening? Why is the party fighting? And I think having more, and Billy, this is something that I kind of took away from you and sort of your DM and campaign like preparation mindset of making sure that the encounters do have like there's something at stake. I don't really, personally, my preference, I don't really like random encounters. They're not meaningful from a storytelling sense. But if the encounters you have in your game have purpose, then it kind of goes back to our original point of having motivations at play and tactics and strategy that would make those motivations come to fruition. It gives you just a better framework to work with. So, you guys want to talk about that at all? Just kind of like perspectives on planning encounters or selecting what encounters to have, or even, letting the party resolve encounters through nonviolent means. I mean, that's kind of a form of combat, I guess. What are your guys' thoughts there?
For sure. I hate just random encounters, because they do serve no point. But I will take random encounters when that randomness is a point. Like, if you're resting, if you choose to take your rest in an occupied dungeon, that random encounter that's part of your risk analysis. That's part of, so that's not a useless, you're adding to that, the fear of, okay, you can take this, but there's a chance that you're going to have to fight these guys, and you're going to be unprepared, and you're not going to have your rested bonuses.
And waste resources and not be able to regain the resources you had planned to regain. Yeah. And
so like things like that, or, to showing how, like if they're, walking through like a dense forest and they're getting lost, and you just keep kind of throwing these random encounters at them where it kind of you can see that they're running out of resources, they're using their spell slots, and they're not getting through. Like, that is a time where you're adding to the overall atmosphere of the situation, that maybe they're feeling helpless or they're worried, and so that's random encounters at certain points can be very, very valuable to add to the atmosphere. But in that point, you're not overcoming that monster, you're overcoming that forest.
Mm-hmm.
That forest is the obstacle, and the monsters are just almost like an ability of that forest. Like, you're fighting the forest, and you have that random thing that if he rolls it's a 5% chance that you're going to have an encounter. So it's thinking about, like, he's attacking, that force is attacking you, and if he rolls a 15 or a 16 plus, he's going to hitting you with those monsters or things like that. Where
that's an interesting way to like perspective to view it. But yeah, it's you against the environment at that point.
Exactly, and that's the only time that I recommend monsters. But that it's going to slow it down because combat slows down. So if that forest encounter may be, you may have 2 forest encounters and that's your whole session. Okay, goodbye. You didn't actually do anything.
Yeah.
But
and I think when you build those encounters, making sure that the difficulty is appropriate, where it's, the party is more or less going to get through it, but the point is to kind of get them to expend some of their resources, maybe chip away at some of their health and wear them down a little bit. So each one of those little random encounters shouldn't be like a critical battle.
Yeah. And it is, I agree. In a lot of like prescribed or like written adventures, I will just skip the random encounter because it's like anytime you travel, you're supposed to roll and see, like, all right, on this to this, one of these things and it, like, one random encounter from city to city to me doesn't add anything to the story. It really doesn't, like you, Bill, was saying, like, it doesn't chip away motivation or chip away resources or anything, because you're going to get to the next city and rest right away. I don't think that those add anything to the atmosphere or anything. I mean, maybe sometimes if, like, you're going through a spooky forest and you want to have a little like mini, basically like one-off session in a spooky forest, cool. But in a lot of like the big campaigns that I've read, almost every time you travel, they want to throw a random encounter at you, but just one random encounter, and for no reason other than, like, I don't know, maybe we fight an owlbear this time.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like Billy's strategy on that. I hadn't thought of it that way before, but I will from now on.
And it's also, I mean, talk to your table. If your table is all about, having that chance of an encounter, and if you're sitting down for a 4-hour session every week and you've got that time, and that encounter isn't going to, in the grand scheme of things, pull that much away from your playing, great, use them. But, like, I know for us, I think all of us we play frequently, but for less time, I would gladly eschew any combat encounter for more, especially random encounter, for more meaningful storytelling and role playing with the party.
Yeah. So in the last adventure I ran, you guys only had 2 combat sessions.
Yeah, with the same fucking guy.
With the same guy, and they both took basically the entire session.
Yeah.
So that's like an easy way to, like, show, like, these things take a long time. Now, something I actually forgot to tell you guys, that is written that, like, he attacks you and then he comes back to fight you, which I thought was really cool. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have had just a random desert encounter as you guys travel from, one place to the other.
Sure.
But I liked the fact that he, like, came back for revenge. And it listed it wrote in there that, like, if he gets, low enough, he'll try to run away, which was like, okay, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, my only wish was that I wish he would have been tied more into the story somehow. I didn't really see much of a connection, at least the way we played through it.
Yes, and in the book, he was not at all. I tied him even more into the story by making him the person that Valor was looking for. So in the book, she's just a bounty hunter, period. End of story. But Chris asked who she was looking for, and on the spot, that, like, I didn't plan it. I wish I had, because it made it
Nice.
It made it even more interesting, even though, like you said, Chris, like, it wasn't really part of the story. It was just like, it's basically like a side story. But those three things made it, or I guess two things, being part of, like, basically a side quest, and like the interestingness, because that could have been two completely random encounters. You could have fought a bandit on the road and muggers in the city. It could be two different things. Because I feel like when people write campaigns, they look at, like, the ratios of, all right, we've got exploration, we've got role playing, we've got stealth, we need combat. So I need 25% combat. So I want to spread it out evenly. I want to put it here, here, here. That kind of thing. And I don't think we've talked about it already. I don't think we adhere to that. Combat needs to move the story forward, and I think it needs to be dangerous. Like, the characters need to have a sense of danger. If I'm just throwing, like, 3 goblins at you and we're basically just going through the motions, like, I don't think there's a point to it at that level.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Chris's idea of defeating combat encounters with other skills, like, not only while you're in combat, but that's a good way to reward your players for those other skills, that you make the combat encounter the price of failure of your skill. So if you're out exploring, and you give them, you think you hear something in the distance, they fail their, they pass their survival, you just, like, saying, like, nothing happens. That's like, okay, was nothing going to happen in the beginning? And I understand that's kind of like fun. You're like, oh, I don't know. But it's way more fun to be like, all right, just in time, you leap into the bushes and you hide behind trees when you see a huge patrol of, orcs or, bugbears, walk by the, the previous area that you were, you snuff out your fire and manage to hide. And so let them know that you were about to get in a combat encounter, but you avoided it.
That's a huge dopamine hit. Like, when if you can, at least for me, if I can avoid a lengthy combat encounter by making a smart decision, that makes me feel good as a character and a player.
Because you actually do earn something in real life, and that is, like, time, like, and the ability to not expend, like, mental energy on something. That's a very interesting.
Yeah, I would rather spend my time role playing and building a story with my friends than going through turn-based combat. But one thing I want to talk about in terms of this concept, and especially from the DM's perspective, is just trying to remove that out, especially in combat, because you shift gears when you get into combat. You change the style of the game and the pacing of the game. And I want to encourage players to just not take the adversarial mindset. And there's kind of that classic trope of, like, the evil DM or the vindictive DM. And combat is just it's such an easy way to kind of take out frustrations on the players. But when you're running combat, there's a way to kind of focus on moving that story forward, giving the enemies some agency, and allowing them to play their motivations out in kind of an unbiased way.
Exactly. You can't be the evil DM if they have a set goal and they are doing their goal. You're really just the arbiter of the situation. In other words, is you have the PCs and then you have the monsters that are doing their own thing, and you're facilitating it. And I think that, like, there are board games that I really like to play where there is no DM. It's like a cooperative games where it tells you in the rules, like, this is what the guys are trying to do. And so you don't really need a DM. Mm-hmm. And I think having a DM is absolutely fantastic, because there's a lot of things that a DM can do. So I'm definitely not advocating not having one or just having everybody set up a pre-planned adventure. But if their goal, if they're high level intelligent people and their goal is to take out the most damaging people first, get around, which is what you would do, as the players, then you're not being an evil DM by having those guys do that, like go after the weaker, softer characters. That is what they're trying to do, and it is the player's role is to try to stop that, try to figure out how to do it. There's a difference between like a sadistic DM where like you are purposely planning to try to take out a character that you don't like.
Yeah.
Somebody's being, like that's being mean. It should never get to that. Like if somebody's being a jerk and they're not playing fair or by the rules, or they're ruining everybody else's good time, killing them in combat should never be a resort. You should talk to them offline or off to the side. Like, dude, what are you doing? If you're calling somebody out for those reasons, and as a DM, you should not try to kill them to show them what's up. Like, oh, I'm in charge and I'm going to show them. Like that's
the DM should not have to. The role of the DM is not to flex.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's such like an ego trip. Flex, I think, is the better word though.
Perfect.
Like you feel like my players are getting one over on me, so I'll show them. But I mean, similar to what Bill was saying, like one of the first games I ever DM'd was the starter set, and it was like with my wife, her sister. I think Chris, you were there, maybe your roommate, and my wife's sister asked me, like, so what is your role here? Are you like our antagonist? Like, are you the bad guy? Are you here to make it difficult for us? And my answer was like, I'm here to make sure everyone has fun. And like, that's the mentality that I've tried to keep. As long as we're all having fun, I don't care if you're getting one over on me. Like that's fun for me too, sometimes. But yeah, I get to go off of what Bill was saying. If you resort to like, I'll show them in combat, that's not a game I want to be a part of on either side. With the problem player, and now you've become a problem DM. Like I'm piecing out on that one.
If you're punishing players, you punish the players' characters for the decisions they make in an appropriate way within the game. Like but don't punish a person in those vindictive ways. And the last point I want to make kind of on this general concept that we're talking about is just a really good table, a good running table. You're all going to be on the same side. As the DM, let the players do cool stuff within reason. Don't let them just like, you have to present challenges and hard choices and risky trade-offs. But when the party takes those and they do succeed, giving them those opportunities, giving them those cool moments to celebrate, that's what makes these games really fun. So removing that adversarial perspective and being on their team and just not giving them everything, but facilitating all of those opportunities for them, whether they take them, whether they succeed or fail at them, is irrelevant. Either way, it makes a great story. But that's kind of how I view the role of the DM, particularly with combat.
Yeah. I want to get back because I do have a couple things that I use and I think are good tips to like keep combat efficient. I don't want to say quick,
but keep it
moving.
moving.
Quick might be, to keep it moving, because quick might be a little dismissive. I think that two of the biggest things that we have done in our personal group, our like group of friends, is that we switched from running on grid to running theater of the mind more often than not. And that just makes combat so much quicker because I don't have to set up a damn map and be like, you're here, basically like a chessboard. Because like, I don't, when I ran that starter set, I went hog wild. I printed out all the maps that work. I taped them together. I like cut the edges off. I had the entire dungeon, all of the dungeons ready. And then you have them like on the table.
And we had our
covered.
Lego minis, our Lego minifigs.
We had our Lego minifig. I wanted to play with my Legos. Fully equipped. I had Lego monsters that I made. Like, I went full out. I had a blast doing that. And that is really fun.
It is. Especially if you're playing in person and like your sessions are built and you have a lot of time and you've got all this stuff. Like, 100%, it is cool to be able to do that.
It was really fun. And I went through like and bought online, like I went through the book and found like all of the magic items or like different items you would get, and bought like Lego representations of those things. So like if you get this staff, here's that staff, and that was like really fun for me. And I'm sure like an awesome reward for the player. Like you actually got this staff. Here you go. Your player gets to hold it, or your character gets to hold it now.
Yeah, there was nothing cooler seeing Jake's character holding in like his little minifig holding glass. What is it? Glass staffs.
Yeah.
Glass. Yeah, whatever. Glass something. His staff.
Yeah, that was
staff. Holding glass staffs. Glass staff.
That's definitely something cool, and I think that I like that kind of like a lot of people think that the grid based is like combat focused, but I think it's the other way. I like Roll20 for the exploration part of it. Like I think of it as almost like either a Final Fantasy. Do you remember the old PlayStation game Eve 6 or what is it? Parasite Eve?
Parasite Eve.
E6,
oh my gosh. Yes.
Parasite Eve. Where like, it's kind of a dungeon horror game, but as soon as you run into a monster, you kind of just the combat starts and it's like a blank grid. It's a blank space and you can do what you want. And that's how I view is that I like that kind of stuff for the exploration, less for the combat, because it's really cool to like if you have a giant mansion to actually move through the mansion. Like, yeah, that's how I like it. That's my favorite thing, and that's why I'm using Roll20 for the next campaign. But it's not for the combat; it's for the exploration. Like, the theater of the mind for combat for me is a lot easier than theater of mind for exploration. For like, if you couldn't have guessed from the first two campaigns. Yeah, it's hard, especially when you're doing a mystery. It's hard to not have like, okay, was there another like there was a window there? It's hard for me to put that together because when you're doing a mystery, you're creating that crime scene, you're creating the scene, and it's way easier for me to like have a visual base for that. But when the encounters come, I'm not like, it's really just the grid, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's interesting because in the aforementioned game that we played before we started recording, where we were fighting in that mansion, it was really you built a whole city. What program did you build that in?
I'm an engineer, so I used AutoCAD to build the city.
Yes, so you built it in AutoCAD, built the road in AutoCAD, built a second city, and built the mansion. Yeah. So we're exploring through the mansion, and that was super cool. And Roll20 has like so many great features like
lighting,
amazing. Yeah, fog of war. You can hide things. Like it is super super cool, and kind of similar to go on like what I was talking about with like me building the map and with Legos. Like that's fun to do. It's fun for you to build, and it's fun for us to explore through. But once we started combat, it got like pretty loose. Like it was like a mixture. Like we were on the grid, but it was still theater of the mind-ish to make it more interesting and to make it kind of just more efficient. Like I don't know. Like I would move my player up, but my like little marker up, and like I simplified it. But like I don't know. It wasn't as like hard rule as I typically think of like gridded combat.
Yeah, and you'll figure out what's going to work for your table. We're not sweating over the square footage of a fireball spell to make sure like one corner hits the target and you know what I mean? Like we just take shortcuts to streamline what's important for us and move those things forward.
On Roll20, a lot of that stuff is done for you.
Yeah.
So that might be a tip. Like, again, I loved building it out on the table and everything, and if that's your jam, go for it. But the tools in Roll20 are just so easy to use. They make a lot of that stuff easy. I would say, other than like using theater of the mind for combat, the second thing we did as a group that made combat go quicker is we run with fewer players.
Yep.
Like, yeah, it's the dumbest, like most simplest thing, but we used to try to get every single buddy that would play or that could play. Our table was twice the size, and no one really got to shine. No one really got to like. And then, like you said, some players would just check out. Like, it's your move. Even if combat goes efficiently, it's going to be 5 minutes before you get a chance to do anything else.
Easy.
So you've checked out. I think maybe a a side tip for players, pay attention. Jesus Christ, pay attention.
Yes.
It drives me insane as a player and as a DM when we get back to somebody and they're like, okay, what's going on? Like, we've been doing this. Like, it's not been that long since it's your turn. Watch, pay attention, plan your moves ahead. What are you going to do? Have your spell ready. So, like, sometimes, like, especially if I'm playing a character class that has a lot of spells, like, I'm looking through my spell book as everybody else is doing things. Like, I'm preparing what I want to do, so when it's my turn, I'm not doing that and wasting everyone's time. That drives me insane. That's probably maybe not my number one pet peeve, but it's up there.
And have your skills and abilities and spells, descriptions, and effects ready too, so that it's like, I'm casting this. Great. Can you resolve that for me? Because I
don't remember. Yeah, I don't know what every spell does. Yeah, that's a good tip. So yeah, I mean, like Chris said, we've gone through a lot of different tools. Like, I've had little spell cards. We have like iPad apps. We play on the computer now, so I'm always like looking up spell. Like, have that stuff ready. I cast a fireball. Cool, it hits. This is what it does. This is what you have to do, as a DM and as maybe other players to resolve this action. Have that stuff ready. It makes it so much quicker. I promise you, it's more fun if you pay attention than if you look at your phone or stack dice. It's more fun to pay attention because you were going to have better strategy and better results. The other thing that we have done, it only saves a little bit of time, but it does save time. When I roll my initiative or I roll to hit, you hit, cool. I roll all my other stuff together. Yeah. I really roll it all together, all my dice. So I'm not like rolling 3 or 4 different types of dice. I roll it, okay, 16 does it hit? Yes, all right, I do a 3, a 4, and a 2. Whatever it is. It just makes it snappier. All these little things, if you've got 4, 5, 6 players, these tiny little things are going to save you a ton of time when you extrapolate it out.
100%.
Yeah, and like if you do multiple attacks, just have either on Roll20 have it in order, or have 2 different. Like, I have a set of green dice and a set of blue dice, and so if I'm doing multiple attack, I'll run I'll roll the attack and the damage for both at the same time. But I'm not, the blue and blue and the green and green go together, so it's not like, okay, I only hit with 1. Let me take my highest damage roll.
So you're using color coding to kind of help.
Yeah. Color coding, like, one is, my main one is my green one. That's my main hand, and the blue one's older and crappier, my blue set. So that's my offhand. And the same thing for if I have multiple monsters that go the same time, have them roll at the same time. So it's not just, all right, Orc 1 or Goblin 1 steps up, roll. So you just roll all of them, or you roll all of the, all of their saves at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would definitely advise you, if you're a GM, get multiple sets. They're less than $10.
They're so cheap.
For what's the name? The big name brand of dice? The
Daiso.
What?
I don't know. I just said a name.
It's like if you go to the store, they come in a little plastic case.
Yeah.
I don't think I own a single one of those, to be honest. I might. Also, I think it's cute that you assume people who play D&D only have 1 set of dice.
Yeah.
Some people do. I bring other pairs of dice for people that don't even have dice. I've had to do that.
You know what? Very accurate.
I have a bag of dice. Yes. I have probably 10 of each type.
I will give you an exaggeration. I'll give you that there are 2 types of players. Players that have bags of dice and players that have no dice. I don't think I will concede that there is a player that has 1 set of dice unless it's their very first time playing and they're like, I have bought what I need for this game. Because I have the bag that Jake made me for the groomsmen gifts.
Oh, the chainmail?
The chainmail bag, which is awesome. He just made us all chainmail bags, which is insane.
That's what I use. Yeah,
chainmail dice bags.
I have that full of dice, and they are all junk. They're just like the cheapest dice you could buy because I don't care. And then I have like metal dice. I like all of these like more premium ones like that I don't even use. I've used like once, and then most of the time we use roll 20 and I hit a button and it says you roll this.
We used to also play in person a lot more too.
Yes. Yeah.
And having those physical dice and those heavy metal dice was, I mean, it's fun to have those. So also, I wanted to add some tips to what Billy was saying in terms of like grouping monsters. You can group monsters initiatives, grouping their rolls. Don't be afraid to do that, or pre-rolling even. Pre-rolling attacks just to have them ready. So you're not doing them, every single round. Like while the players are doing something, you could pre-roll the next attacks.
Yes. It's like another one of those things you don't think it's going to save you time, but all of these little things end up saving a ton of time. I know when we're playing here, I like the kind of like the Foley work of like rolling the die and like hearing it. But I usually have that ahead. Like I have it rolled so that I know this is their attack roll. This is what they would roll for damage. It makes it so much snappier, especially if it's, I mean, not even especially if it's like a less important encounter. Like sometimes the big encounters, like I want to get the procedural stuff out of the way so we can focus on like the more interesting things of it.
Yeah. What are some other just like tactical ways that you guys keep the game or keep combat specifically moving? We talked about a number of different methods. One of the things I like to do, just as we're, kind of going back to your point, Eric, about from the player perspective, I always like to let the table know who's coming up next so that they can start thinking ahead of time while, the player before them is going, just to get them primed.
You are the only DM I've ever had that does that, and I like it. And I forget to do it because I'm like, oh, I'm going to copy that. Because you'll say like, all right, Eric, you're up, and Billy, you're on deck. Like, it is a good reminder because I expect, like, after, like, I write down, as a DM, I write down your initiative. Like, I know where everybody is. Why don't you? So it's one of those things that's like, I need to remember not to expect you to know things. Actually, I think that's a great little tip.
I think that actually came from that guy Mark who was DMing our Strahd Adventurers League game.
Maybe
I think I picked it from him.
And this, so like we've mentioned this a couple times. I think if at all possible, this might be like one of the best tips to make you a better player. Period. Play with a bunch of different people, as much as you can. Maybe watch people play too if you can't. Like. On I don't know, YouTube or Twitch or whatever.
Or listen to this podcast.
Listen to this podcast. Oh yeah, I forgot. Because you will pick up like these little things that like, ooh, that's interesting. That's fun. That's, I never thought about describing a hit that way, and I never thought about just rolling all the, because like if you like, we only played with each other for a long time, but like Chris and I started going to our local game store and playing with other people. Chris plays with people at work. We all watch different media, or listen to stuff, and we pick up things. I think some of like the more popular shows, you don't actually pick up as much because they edit all that stuff out. But if you watch like the nitty gritty shows or listen to them, I feel like it's more of a real game.
And that's why in this show, I try to leave as long as it's relevant to what we're doing and resolving. I leave a lot of the stuff we're trying to figure out in there just to be instructive. Like our live plays aren't necessarily, I guess, like they're not Adventure Zone. They're not for comedy. We want to play fun games and we want to enjoy them. And part of that is like how we play contributes to that. And that's what I want to, help other players with, leaving that stuff in. I hope it helps other players kind of give them the tools to resolve this stuff. Yeah.
And I think all of us have grown so much in this, like as players, as DMs, as everything, like creature designers, combat designers. And I think a lot of it is learning from each other. Like I learned from just the both of you a lot. And I know it's been hard the past year, especially. And with all of us being, the 4 people who play this game are in 4 different states. So like we don't get to play together, but it's important to watch others and like expand your lexicon basically.
Yeah. I especially just like, we've all learned from each other. The community is so amazing that there's a wealth of information on how to be a better DM, how to improve as a player, how to bring just like better experiences to your table. So just learn as much as you can. Try out everything. Try out different tools, apps, approaches, perspectives. You're going to find what sticks. You're going to find what's going to work for you, and just jettison what doesn't. That's really the kind of spirit of what we're trying to do for our games. It'd be great if we could play all together in person all the time, but you know, and using the apps is fun, but we do our kind of 80-20 principle to get the most enjoyment with the minimal amount of investment possible. Cool. Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
I can't think of any other. I mean, like I cheat a little when we do things like this, and I'm looking up lists to like help me jog my memory. And some of the things that the lists have are like run easier battles, which like, okay, duh. Like that's going to make it faster, but that's not going to do kind of what we talked about, which is make it like important. Yeah. I would rather run fewer battles and important battles than like, okay, this random encounter was supposed to be an owlbear, but let's make it a bugbear instead. I like it. Those kind of like simple battles with foregone conclusions, like we're gonna win this, it's just gonna take us 3 rounds, drive me nuts. Like this stuff like that, I want you to maybe fail, or have to think, have to actually spend resources, or kind of whatever the point is. But I kind of don't agree with that one. One of the other things this list said is keep battlegrounds simple. And I don't know if I agree with that one either. Simpler combat area makes faster battles. Maybe. Yeah. But it doesn't. But again, like, I'm not looking for just fast battles. I'm looking for efficient battles and interesting and fun and important battles.
Yeah. If it's interesting, then it doesn't slog. Like, it may take longer, but if it's interesting, everybody's involved. If there are multiple levels and obstacles that people are hiding behind, it makes it a little bit more interesting, and people should be paying more attention, because if you're going tactical, and if people want to do tactical, or you have that 1 or 2 tactical in the combats, the boss battle and some other things.
Having an overly simplified battlefield also give like elements like cover and other things that could be on the field that the party can use and that the enemies can use, makes for, I think, more interesting combat. But you're also, if you're not allowing the players to utilize things like cover, you're kind of hamstringing them in that sense too. I've been playing a lot of Solasta, which is an awesome 5e rule set within a game, and just it's made me a better combat player in D&D just from using those elements, because you really have to pay attention to those things.
Yeah, and I think Billy nailed it when he said like combat can take a long time if it's fun and it's not a slog. Like I think that might like be the new thesis of like what I'm looking for. I don't necessarily need it to be efficient or fast. I need it to not feel that way. I need it to not feel like a slog.
That's a good distinction.
If everybody's having fun and it takes the whole session, good. Like that's fine. That is in fact good, and what I'm trying to do. So one of the other things they had on here was use fewer monsters and use monsters of the same type. And again, I disagree. From what Billy was saying earlier, like, I want different types of monsters that are going to challenge you in different ways. Like, if I have already done my due diligence and cut all the combat that doesn't add anything to this story, I want my encounters to be interesting. I don't want to just throw 10 goblins at you, I know what a goblin does, I know how to react to them. If it's 5 goblins, a couple bugbears, and a hobgoblin, like, okay, what do I do? Like, this is different now. Or whatever the scenario is. So I disagree with that one out of hand also.
Well, you also give, like, I understand the spirit of it, like one monster type is easier to deal with, but to your point, like a bugbear with some goblins and maybe like a direwolf, there's like the goblins have different hit and run tactics and pack tactics that they can use. The bugbear is going to be a heavy hitter. Like, there's so many more elements that you have to factor from a combat standpoint that makes it more difficult and therefore more interesting. At the very least, the stakes are raised.
Yeah, and I think again, like what Billy said, I don't think the goal should be necessarily to make combat faster. I think it should be to make it efficient and interesting and important.
And some other ways to make it interesting too, is just like other ways to resolve the combat. You know, if there's like, oh, there's a horde of goblins, but there's also, you know, a huge boulder precariously perched on a ledge above. You know, you give at least something like a way to resolve or end it in a fast way.
That's interesting, because very few times I think would I, as a player, and it might just be because like this is like the zeitgeist of like how like D&D works or how we think it works. Very few times as a player would I think to like look for environmental kills. Would I even ask the DM like, okay, do any of these trees look like I could push them down or chop them down, or like, is there a river? Like, I don't think I would. That's so interesting. I just don't think that I would do that. I am watching right now, the Celesta, because I looked to see if it was on sale. So I was distracted for a second. The Celesta video, and right as you said that, there was a clip of like somebody pushing a rock onto a group of people. So I see where your head's at.
Oh, I've done that plenty of times in Celeste. I've dropped boulders on orcs. I've pushed, you know, enemies into lava. It's like par for the course. But to your point though, if the DM's not offering those things and the player, you don't even think to look for those things, it's not going to happen. But if a player, if we're in combat and we're like in a valley and we're fighting and Billy's character asks if there's something like that, and I hadn't thought about it, I think it's a great idea. Now there is. Yep. And that's what I call that immediate world building, you know, that collaborative world building. I hadn't put that in there, but I'm going to now. You're still going to have to go through some hoops to like, and challenges to resolve that. But I want that to happen.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting because like in Divinity, like the Divinity games, the original Sin ones, like they are very close to Dungeons and Dragons. And in fact, the new one, you know, is. And that game is like based around, or at least combat at least is based around like environmental hazards and different things like that. Like I want to pour this oil on the ground so I can light it on fire. Like it's so tactical, but I don't take that like thinking into this game for whatever reason. And again, it's probably just like muscle memory basically of like, this is how combat works in this game. And it's not how combat works in video games, which I am usually a proponent of, like, because they are not the same and never shall the two meet kind of thing. But the games, like the video games that are like very much based on Dungeons and Dragons, I think really interesting combat strategies and tactics and ways to run them from these types of games, because these like developers have spent years designing this combat.
Yeah. And you know, I it's funny because I typically do not like combat, or I shouldn't say I don't like it. It's not my favorite part of the games that we play typically, but I really enjoy games like Celesta, Baldur's Gate, and the Divinity series, because it gives me like, I guess the gamification of the combat makes it more fun. And I guess, and it's also, it's just me playing, so I can take my time and be thoughtful with my decisions and playing with combat there and kind of exploring those options.
Yeah. So I think you kind of hit it like the nail on the head. A lot of, the reason I like these games is because they do the things that we were talking about. They make it efficient, they make the battles important, and they make them interesting. So it's fun.
And they give you opportunities to explore some of those more unique combat mechanics that maybe you wouldn't typically use or explore in your tabletop game. Like putting the oil or shocking the water, or you know, other things, using caltrops, or there's a ton of, or cutting the rope to make the sandbags fall. You know, there's so many, or chandelier.
Else, I mean, another one that they say is determine targets randomly, which I do sometimes. If my monster doesn't have like a specific, like Billy was saying, like if they have a specific motivation, I'm gonna like, oh shit, that archer's gonna kill us, so let me go get him first. Like with the bandit, I did determine which you guys randomly. I just rolled a d6, and each of you had your like assigned numbers. But it was because he is kind of shooting wildly, and that was how I resolved shooting wildly. Like he wasn't taking aim at Chris and then rolling his d20. He was just like, "You asshole," and like just shot. So yeah, again, I don't think I agree with that.
I absolutely disagree, because then it doesn't give the players control over the situation, in that you need to have the monsters react in response to what they're doing. Like you are, the GM's a narrator, so they are putting the inputs, and then you are formulating what happens and then giving the outputs. And so having the character randomly decide if it's not a smart creature, if it's just animal instinct, it'll probably go after what it sees as the biggest threat. Like unless it's like a zero intelligence monster, it will have some idea of what it wants to do, and just having it random takes away the characters, because they could do something brilliantly, and you're just like,
yeah,
okay, like it doesn't really matter. Like it's gonna be, everything's going to be random anyway, so why do what you need to do? If they do something brilliant, like if you have a downed character and the character steps up to
like if a character steps to protect it, but the dog still like
and the dog is gonna be like, oh, like you think like, is the dog gonna hit the character that's already like down and is not a threat, or this now you have a new threat coming here? What is the dog going to do? Like like
and if I picked characters randomly, I assume it means like rolling. Is the dog going to turn and run away to like a different character, like and just run back and forth and back and forth?
Yeah. I think there's a time and place to use any kind of random thing like that, but it's very, very selective and small.
This might be my bad for I'm picking on this list, but it's tips to speed up combat and
not make good combat.
Not make good. Yeah.
And I think we kind of shifted talking today just from like efficient combat to good combat. I think that's a really good distinction Billy made.
Not a sloggy combat. So when I say like keep it moving, you can keep the encounter moving by just skipping the combat entirely.
Right. Yeah.
Or just having them one shot the character. Oh, you have giving them 1 HP. That'll get that combat moving real quick.
Yeah, like minions or swarms.
Yeah,
and that could be fun. Like that could be a neat encounter. Like there are. I mean, we did it with rats. I guess like if you hit it, you kill it. But there's 100 of them.
Yeah.
So I think again, my distinction now is going to be like efficient, important, and damn, I forgot the third one.
Interesting.
Thank you. And I think these are only making it not even efficient, just fast. Because another one of their suggestions is to use the like standard damage. So like when you on your like stat block, it'll say does like this much 2d6 does this much to this much damage, or averaged as this. And I disagree with that too. I did that in the very first starter set encounter with the goblins, and Billy called me out on it like after 2 things. He's like, are you using the average damage? And I was like, yeah. He's like, don't do that. Like called me out. He's like, because I know what it is, and and had like all these reasons against it, and I was like, oh, all right, fair play. So I didn't know to not do that.
Bill, do you want to talk about those reasons?
Yeah, if you have 6 health and you know that their average damage is 5, you can tank another hit. But if there's a range, you get the risk. Like it adds. I think that average damage is more for a GM tool to figure out how hard this monster hits. This is about the same thing for the average health points. I think it's really fun. Like when you have a monster, just give them the average one. But if you have like characters, like if you have a bunch of bandits, they're not all going to have the exact same HP. Have them give them a little character and give them different weapons. And then adjust their AC respectively. So if they all have a shield and a longsword, take one of them away their shield and give them a great sword or an axe, and adjust things respectively. But this guy's going to have one more strength and one less dexterity. Adjust their stats, and it's a very quick thing to do. But it just it gives them a little bit different. Like you have two, you have this one with a sword and a shield, this one with a great axe, and this one with 2 daggers or a bow. Like, change their weapons out.
And now they're more of a balanced party that you have to, adapt to. They have more diversity.
Damn,
Yeah, and
see, this is why I listen to this show. That's a good tip.
Yeah, and it adds diversity. Like if everybody has 28 hit points, you can kind of keep track of them. But if the big guy, you're probably going to have give him a little bit more and make the little guy a little bit less. You can just have them average to be the same. So the big guy gets 5 more, the little guy gets 5 less.
Yeah, I really like the idea of using that average that's provided in the DM books as kind of a finger in the wind to understand how hard this thing hits or what it's capable of, and then tweaking it appropriately, just kind of like with the challenge ratings.
Yeah, I never thought of like the hit points is hit points. Like I never thought of it being the average, because I'm looking at the goblin stat block and hit point 7, 2d6. So like I could easily just roll 2d6 and get their
hit points.
They could be 12. Like this could be a beefy goblin.
Yeah.
That's
and I think that would be fun. Like if you're if a player's metagaming and they've done 11 damage to this goblin, they're like, WTF? Why is this goblin still standing?
Exactly, and it goes along the line. I mean, it's just the opposite, the reverse of what Bill was saying about using the like averaged damage. Like the average damage for a short bow for a goblin is 5. If I'm only using that and Billy's character has 6 hit points, he knows he can take 2. So if we know that because goblins, everybody knows goblins. If you know that their hit points is 7, and I know like I do this much damage, like it changes the scenario. But if I don't know what it is, it adds to that mystery that we talked about earlier, like that investigation of these characters. Okay, I know they're goblins. Maybe their AC is a little different. Maybe their damage is a little different. Maybe their hit points are a little different. I think that's a super interesting
and
way to go about it.
The player's going to play and react differently to that. And it might be subtle, but they're going to probably act with more self-preservation. They're probably going to act with more tactical, more sound tactical choices. There'll be some slight shifts as a result of that, I think.
Yeah.
It's with the theater of the mind too, like because instead of calling them Goblin 1 or Goblin 2, you can say Great Axe Goblin or Sword Goblin or Skinny Goblin, Beefy Goblin.
Yeah. There was a tip that I had read on some blog somewhere. I need to start remembering so I can give credit. They recommended something similar, Billy, but they would give them like, the wart faced goblin, or like giving them like descriptive characteristics.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. It's way better than Goblin 2 steps up or Goblin 1. Just, give them different characteristics. And yeah, even if they're all exactly the same, you can call them, give them just, aesthetic characteristics. But like if you are fighting a gang of, a bunch of rogues or a bunch of villagers or whatever, just saying like, oh, you attack the bigger one with the great sword or the smaller one? Oh, I attack the skinny one. And then when you're refreshing, okay, where's everybody? Oh, the skinny rogue is, over, with this character, and the beefy one, is surrounded. He's being flanked, and it's better than just okay, Goblin 1 or Goblin, 2, or okay, which one do you hit? Do you hit the one? Like that's always what I think slogs it down, is trying to remember when you have multiple of the same guys.
Definitely.
Like, okay, who did I hit already? Who's where? Did that guy move? Because like you hit the guy. Okay, did I hit that one? Is that the one I hit already?
But
how many times did that ask?
Yeah, as a player also, it's helpful to keep those notes and be aware of like who's been damaged, so you don't have to keep asking the DM.
Yes. So that I think this is a great tip for making combat interesting. Maybe not efficient, because that's going to take the DM a lot longer than just like 6 goblins and they're all the same. But do your work beforehand.
Yeah, but I really like, and that's one thing I've been guilty of, is just kind of like enemy A, enemy B, and that's a really good tip of just whatever kind of distinction you can bring to the baddies, whether it's by their weapons or their aesthetics or other maybe their behaviors, but bringing more flavor to that to kind of differentiate them.
Cool idea. I think that is it.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything else. I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that wraps up this week's episode on how to make D&D combat more interesting, efficient, and effective. Those are just some of our favorite tips, but we want to hear about yours. Let us know in the comments how you keep encounters moving and what you do to keep them fresh and interesting. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and make sure to give it a like or review. It goes a long way in supporting the show. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.